Before we start the show, let me thank you for clicking onto this video. If you'd like to see more videos like these, why not subscribe and hit the bell button so you'll never miss an episode. Now, on with the show.
One mark will be vehicle 6.
Comprised of warrior women.
Hi friends, I'm LJ Jarvis, and welcome back to Yo's Jarvis Show.
Greetings everyone, welcome back to a new episode of On Air with Jarvis, the podcast of all things Warhammer and general stuff I find of interest. Joining me today is the man behind the radio theater himself, Colyn of Cold Open Stories. How's it going, good sir?
Well, it's going very well. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, no problem, good sir, and it's very cool to have you on this week.
Well, tons of things coming out from us. So happy to have some time, a little bit of a breather between literally everything that we've had come out in the last 7 days. So looking forward to talking a little bit about that and what we do.
Most certainly, and just for the audience in the back who might not know what Cold Open Stories is, what is it, Colyn? Oh, sorry, is that how you pronounce your name? I should ask in advance.
That's all right. It's Colyn.
Colyn, sorry.
That's all right. So Cold Open Stories is Cold Open Stories was launched in 2019 as a love letter to short fiction and weird fiction that can have the power to transform and move us. And what we did is, with the decision to launch this project, we started working with the IP of Warhammer 40,000. And when people head over to coldopenstories.com, they can find a couple different things. They can find our fast fiction contest, which is a 1,000 word writing competition with different members from the Warhammer community. We also have the short fiction anthology. That is a quarterly collection of longer stories, 2,000 to 8,000 words. And with those, we also have editors on the team that help support emerging writers with the idea of helping them flesh out their skill, learn their voice, and eventually get them to into Black Library. And we also have both some audio sort of narrated fiction, but the big piece is the full cast audio dramas. These are a global top 100 award-winning podcast series. It includes voice actors from games and titles, Ubisoft. We've had people from BBC, Royal Shakespeare Company, and Black Library as well. And these are full cast recordings. So these are written within the universe of Warhammer 40,000. But there's sound design, full composed music, and a great cast. But we do also bring in new and emerging talent, so people can audition to play the parts when we have these open casting calls, and really helps give voice to a new generation of talent.
That's very epic to hear too. Hearing people from BBC and Games Workshop part of this whole thing, that's very epic to hear.
Yeah, we're just really focused on telling good stories, but we also understand that when people see the caliber of talent that are involved there, that it can actually excite them. To be like, oh wow, that I heard that person in one of the the Aliens video games, like the actual franchise IP, and that's what we're really trying to do. Is we're trying to be a good steward of an IP, and with Games Workshop and Warhammer 40,000, we're trying to not only tell stories that are true to the universe, but tell stories that otherwise wouldn't have the chance to be told. We don't have the mandate of trying to push models or a particular release, so we're able to kind of delve into different stories. We had a full fast fiction collection, which was just nothing about. Was entirely about exodites. And then we also had audio dramas that have to do with that slice of life. We had one production. It was all about a news broadcaster within the Imperium. Or we did a full Slaanesh traitor guardsman platoon. These are stories that we traditionally would not see coming out of the Black Library. So we're trying to say, well, what's Warhammer adjacent? What's something that we'd really like to see, but might not otherwise get that attention or time?
Exactly, and if anything, I think Games Workshop focuses too much on the only war parts that from their tagline that everyone will know at this point. It's just that, yes, it is Warhammer by the name. It is going to be more focused as, the war aspect in their stories, and it is a tabletop war game. Yet the grim darkness of it is what makes it, gives it its color. And even though I think that's kind of missing in some of their stories, I think that's where your team comes in.
It is, and I will say we started this 3 years ago, and since then we've actually seen some changes at Games Workshop. You know, with the you've got the entire launch of Warhammer Horror, you've got Warhammer Crime. The idea that let's just go a little bit outside of the realms of battle and show what society is like, or show how it can be impacted by the Imperium being a terrifying regime to actually live within, or in our case, really helping kind of bring the magnifying glass to what the Xenos are up to. What are all these different alien races actually doing? Because we know that in terms of support, humans sell books, humans sell models, but as we're at the time of this speaking, we're seeing the middle of the Eldritch Omens relaunch of the Eldar, which are fantastic and will hopefully bring a reinvigoration of attention to the faction. But we also want to make sure that we're there for people to pick up and kind of understand what the stories are like, because to be fair, a lot of the fiction, a lot of the stories and audio dramas and audiobooks are behind paywalls. And I remember a time where, being able to hop onto a website and you'd have these short stories of like, oh, that's interesting. Or you pick up the codex at a library or a local bookstore, and you're just kind of like flipping through and you're like, what are these short little tales? We wanted to create that same environment, but with less focus on the world building and more focus on the character. Who are the people, or what are the circumstances that are being lived in within this environment? Less of where a lot of 40K works is treating it like a future history, telling these large sweeping scopes of environments and situations rather than the people.
Exactly. And I do want to say too about, your whole website where people can submit their short stories. People will say, well, it's fan fiction, but here's the thing, it's good fan fiction. And it's what fan fictions, like what Dusky Talk had told me when she was on the show. People might have the misconception on what fan fiction is, and a lot of fans can write really great stuff sometimes, or if not most of the time.
Yeah, fan fiction gets a bad rap, and I personally hate, the bad rap that usually gets is that some sort of self-insertion, or that it doesn't play by the rules of the canon, or it plays loose with the story. But as we've seen, the reason why 40K was such a great IP, to start with, was because that even by Games Workshop's admittance, it's a setting, not a story. Notwithstanding, the Horus Heresy, but we're talking 40K. The idea that there are, thousands of worlds, and of those millions of different niches of culture or populations that you can play with. I think that obviously not everything is going to appeal to everyone, but what we've seen with our stories, as well as some of our authors and even editors actually getting picked up to go work at Black Library and White Dwarf now, is that there is a great core of the community within Warhammer that needs some sort of ability to either develop the confidence and say, well, I've never written before. It doesn't matter. Every book is someone's first. Every short story is someone's first. It doesn't matter if you started at 15 or 45. You can definitely jump in and try to write something. Your taste will always exceed your talent, in my opinion, is that you'll read and go, oh, I didn't really like this. Maybe there's something to do better. But that's called growth. And if you treat fan fiction both as a final product of, growth and development, as well as, oh, I made something that was really good, there are two things that you can definitely appreciate there. And it's really exciting when you can find someone who, they're still on their journey of growth, but they're already kicking out some amazing stories.
Exactly. And from the stories you presented us so far, both on the website and on your YouTube channel at Dungeons 3D's, radio theaters, you have told such excellent stories from the fans and all that. Stories that I keep returning to now and again because they're that good,
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it's definitely an abundance of riches to have people joining the writing contests with fast fiction or joining the anthology. Although we obviously take a while to produce the full cast audio dramas because of the labor and the work involved for that, doing all of our own sound Foley and sound effects, etc. I will say that, there are hundreds of stories on the website now that people can pick up, and we've recently been collating them into editorial curated collections. So, rather than going, oh, there's so many anthologies, or maybe I don't know which fast fiction contest I want to go into the theme. If you want to just jump right in and be like, all right, Cult Mechanicus, Servants of the Machine God, I want to read that. It's a lot easier to just jump right in and go, all right, I want to listen to A Cog in Crimson, the audio drama, or maybe I want to read some stories about the God Engines, or even the Men of Iron, or just the interesting dynamics of a holy order of technology loving backwards regressive post-humans. So there's definitely something for everyone with on the site.
There definitely is, and I do want to say too, especially since we're on the topic of exploring the whole idea of the human side of what is the Imperium of Man, because that's what Cold Open Stories does, or what your team does. Is how your team allows people to explore areas of the Imperium that we don't even see so often, and that's where I think echoes of Satellite 66B comes in.
It's our pilot episode. So you went really for a deep cut where I'm like, we were still learning. We were still trying to do it as a proof of concept, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. And even though it was your pilot, it's a very good pilot. And from stories like these, we see parts of the Imperium that even though briefly, we don't see so often in like books or what someone might see within Codex art. We see like people giving radio announcements and all that. You wouldn't really think of something like that. People in radio giving their news for the day.
Yeah, and also doing it though with that Imperial Vox broadcast that this is propaganda. This is a way of keeping control of a population. But we've had everything from people working in there's one title on the story. It's called the Bureau of Administrative and Bureaucratic Administration. Like if that does not scream Imperium of Man, middle management, nothing else will. But we've got people doing conflicting duties, people living in like the gutters of the city, others who are, yes, the siege is off on another world, but how are they dealing with conscription? How are they dealing with, food shortages, or what they're eating, or radio broadcasts, or, the idea that they think that maybe their neighbor is a cultist. Are they really, the idea that can you actually trust them? And then we've got people who are living at the highest spires of a hive city versus those who are living in like the underhive and have no idea or no context for what society is like above. And you get to play off those two environments, and then you can just start to get weird with, gene stealer cults or infestations, or people with these sort of backdoor ideas of, we have a very private elite tasting room for people who are very rich and they want to try these alien beasts as part of just like a high hot couture sort of dark secret society. Everyone wears masks, like, because the Imperium's going to crack down on that. And you've got people who work at mining rigs and what it's like to have your folklore and your stories, or what it's like to be a human seeing an Astartes from the point of view of a person. What does that actually do to you, for good and for bad? There's just a lot of room to play, and it's a great sandbox.
So much room for it.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing about 40K. It's literally a sandbox for people to create things with. And
we've enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, and we all know about the whole trademark thing that Games Workshop's doing right now, saying make fan content, but at the same time don't make fan content. That kind of got people a bit annoyed. But I say, but for what we're able to create, I say it's really epic, and it's really epic to see stuff that you guys are creating.
Well, to the point of Games Workshop and IP, because we actually have a good relationship with the legal department at Games Workshop, and we've had conversations with members of their team before. And I think it really comes down to the idea of, are you creating as a fan, or are you creating as someone who wants to build a portfolio? Or the third option is, are you creating because you want to try to, monetize it? And there's three different camps. And I think that it's a spectrum. Some people will fall more to one end or the other. We've really said we want to do this without running a Patreon. Like I still get people, dropping comments of like, how is this free? How is this actually available? The level of the audio dramas, the quality of the fiction with editorial support. And the reason is everyone involved is just a fan of 40K, and we want to help people find the setting. We want to create that sort of transparent way for people to get interested and then move into Games Workshop proper.
Exactly. And for something like to create content or contents like this, you don't necessarily need to start off with like a huge backing of followers to create stuff. Sometimes it's usually the creator using the talents that he has to create something he wants to do. That's usually what the drive to do it. Like, you can have all the backing in the world, but still not end up creating a good product, you know?
Yeah, like if you're starting and your whole intent is, I want to do this and maybe make a little bit of money on the side, my personal feeling is, well, what do you want to get out of the creative process? I'm very much process based over product based, and I think that a lot of the team at Cold Open would also agree with that. Is it's just like, we're really focused on how do we help people grow, how do we help new voices get heard, and I would just say one of the benefits that we've seen is, if you are just transparent and open and welcoming, and you kind of check your ego at the door and say, we just want to make something good, and we're not caring about like the financial implications of that, you will get a lot of people who will. And, you know, for example, with our acting talent, or we've even had Black Library authors submit for the site to say, I just want to do this because I like the setting and there's no, you know, hindrances involved. That's great. Like, that's exciting. To just be able to tell stories freely without any concern of like, oh, well, what of the money of all? What about the IP rate? Is just take money out of it and tell good stories and focus on character, and the world just keeps turning.
I couldn't agree more. And in a sense, this sort of does remind me of, you know, the movie Night of the Living Dead. Because the director, when he started the whole thing, he didn't have this huge backing. It was him using his experience from these commercials, people who wanted to join the project, and from their passion, wanting to create something good, they made one of the best known horror movies known to man.
Right, and I think that the advantage for that is that what we've seen with now this golden age of television is studios that are kind of just giving people the money and getting out of the way, saying make the thing that you want to make. But we've now we're transitioning into another period where it's algorithm based. It's based on, well, the return on investment isn't just the money coming in; it's how many eyes do we get on it. You might have something that doesn't make a lot of money at a box office, but it has a second life when it gets to the internet, right? Like it's
exactly.
out of theaters. So what does that look like? How many TV shows have we seen in the last while that have campaigns that are like, bring back X show, you know, because it got canceled by a studio, and then shockingly it changes studios, it moves to another network, or it finds its way on streaming services, and you go, okay, there was enough of an audience that want to see it pursued that it just kind of, things are changing is kind of the point that I'm making. The environment has really changed over the last decade for sure.
But then sometimes the question goes, are they really bringing these shows? Are they only bringing the show back because they might think they might get some money out of it? Because people probably know by now that they're bringing back Futurama, and I have heard people say, well, it had a good enough ending to end the season, and the last few seasons weren't that great either. So if there was a way to put an end to the Futurama book, it would have been the last episode. So I don't think, even though some people might have wanted the show to come back, I think bringing back something like Futurama would be sort of, what am I trying to say, forcing, you know, something to be made for money, even though people might not necessarily think, well, I think the last episode is fine enough, guys. You don't need to bring back the show.
Yeah,
let it retire.
But the argument I'd make there, though, is that it's whether you want something to come back that is an exact carbon copy of the thing you had before, and the whole problem of, can you ever go home again, right? Like a big example is we have the new Lord of the Rings coming out from Amazon.
Oh yeah.
You know, what does that mean? Why is that being made? And I think that as storytellers, the thing that we have to concern ourselves more often than not is, I use this example. Look at the difference between going back to your roots and telling a story that's within the same spirit with different characters versus continuing storytelling. Star Wars fans are very familiar with this. We saw with the sequel trilogy versus The Mandalorian. You will ask anyone which is the critical darling, both for fans and for new audiences, and it's going to be, you know, The Mandalorian. People love it because of it tried something new. But we're also, as people, resistant to change. If you know, something came out tomorrow and we said Warhammer 40,000 is becoming Warhammer 50,000, you can guarantee that a lot of people would absolutely hate this idea. We saw it with the New World, the Old World and Age of Sigmar. But within creative freedom, if you feel that your story has reached a natural conclusion and you want to bring it back creatively, you are obliged to take those bones and try something different. It can still have the same emotional core, it can have some of the same influences. Look at what influenced it. You know, like if you're talking about Star Wars, go back and look at Westerns or samurai films. If you're going to try the same thing with Warhammer, whether it's fantasy or 40K, because you want to make it available for a broad audience, on the inevitable TV streaming service that is not Warhammer Plus, but we're talking some sort of live action IP property. It's going to be different. No matter what, it's going to be different than what you grew up enjoying or what you've recently found. That's okay. It's just understanding of what are the bones, what are the core foundations of what makes this interesting. And that's something also that Cold Open has attempted to do, of saying, well, what are the core pieces of Warhammer? Now, how do we kind of replay those puzzle pieces in a remixed way?
I do want to give a comment real quick about a sort of sequel saying to 40K. I think the most appropriate title, considering how Games Workshop evolved fantasy to AOS, I think the sequel for 40K would be for Warhammer Era of Gilliman, to go on a play on words,
I wouldn't disagree, and I think that by that point all the Primarchs will be back, and I literally mean every single one. Like, how did Sanguinius return? I don't know. It's everything would be back on the table, I think, just because that temptation is so great. But as we're seeing with Era Indomitus, and then the backpedaling, and then kind of the inching forward again, it just strikes me that it's something that we if you're going to be making creative choices, you can own them. And some people are going to get mad, but you just keep trying new things, and 40K has held a status quo for quite some time. And unfortunately, it does depend on whether your audience wants to go along with it as well. You can try new things, but if it's your audience dictates the market. But I will also make the argument that if audiences knew what they wanted, they would be the authors in the creation of it. Sometimes people think they know what they want, but you have to give them what they need instead. But you have to still have some sort of little tidbits of enticement. And it's a very difficult thing to do for writers, for actors, for directors, is having a story that you want to tell, but also knowing how to please your audience without appealing to the absolute base sentiments of winking and nodding and sort of like nudging and be like, did you see that? Did you see that? Every few moments.
Yeah. And also real quickly, back when you made the comment on Warhammer 50K, there was an actual fan creation called Warhammer 50K. I'm not sure if you heard of it.
Absolutely. Was at the time of the Era of Time to Come. That was actually one of the first things that I read when I found my way into Warhammer. Was because 40K, all the books, everything's available, but they all had a price tag. I did the whole, you go through a wiki and you just are like losing, 8-9 hours of your day just reading stuff, and you go down that rabbit hole and you're like, what have I done with my life? But I did find my way into 50K, and I was like, okay, this is someone trying to do some new world building. What are the characters that exist in this? And I will say the 50K project was, at least in its core and its DNA, something that inspired what we attempted with our Inquisitor community writing project, and then what we've done with Cold Open Stories as a whole.
Well, that's very interesting. And also real quick, back when we had the little topic on fantasy and AOS, even though, yes, they made a sequel to Fantasy, there is also the real reason why they were doing this is that, well, Warhammer Fantasy, when comparing to 40K and all the other stuff Games Workshop had, wasn't doing so well financially. Like, from what I hear, is that it was costing them money to keep Fantasy alive rather than making the money. So they were like, okay, how about we retire the setting and try to create something new out of it? And even though End Times wasn't the best written thing from Warhammer Fantasy from what I've heard, and AOS certainly wasn't the best thing when it came out, what comes now, and by now in 3rd edition, I'm really liking AOS. It's comparing Fantasy and AOS, they're two different things, but I do like them both. And for what AOS is now, it's something really epic, I think.
Well, so here's the question: why, as an audience, as someone who consumes the content, why are you enjoying AOS over the old world?
Well, I think for me personally, I didn't get that much exposure with something like Warhammer Fantasy. When I was getting into Warhammer, and I've been with 40K for years, I just never had the same, maybe not accessibility or interest in fantasy. I liked fantasy. I liked the whole idea of it. But something like 40K is what kept me more interested. It was the meat and potatoes. But that doesn't mean I didn't read any fantasy books. Like, even after Warhammer Fantasy has retired, I was reading like the Gotrek and Felix books, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool setting. And this was when AOS second edition was still running around, and I was like, oh, fantasy's pretty cool after all. But I wish they kept it alive instead of retiring it. Now, even though I like AOS, there's something about fantasy for me that's like, oh, this is very intriguing. It's really too bad that they retired it. But they're bringing it back now as the old world. And comparing the two settings, to answer that question, it's like, well, fantasy is the low fantasy setting. It has, historical influences here and there. There's the Empire, Kislev, Bretonnia, and all this stuff. It's literally a mixture of all the fantasy stuff and almost history stuff. But with AOS, they went a different direction. They went full on high fantasy. There is no, oh, this kingdom is medieval Russia or something like that, or this kingdom is medieval France or anything like that. It's not like that. We have Stormcast Eternals, Ioneth Deepkin, Fire Slayers, and all that.
See, it's interesting the relation, and I'm sure we'll get back to 40K in a second for anyone who's listening and really wants us to stop talking about fantasy stuff. But it's the idea of like straight up swords and sorcery and that high fantasy. I would actually argue that Age of Sigmar is this sort of vivid, weird fantasy that audiences have really jumped onto because low fantasy, fairly realistic, fabulous magic. Whereas you've got something with different realms and these large magical beasts and things that look different, is that by this point, fantasy, and we saw with other forms of media, we'd run through Lord of the Rings, we'd run through Game of Thrones. Just visually speaking, a fantasy world is a fantasy world is a fantasy world, right? Like you can look at something and say, oh, this is not differentiated that highly. Compare the same thing to, Star Wars, which is, I will say, science fantasy, but look at Star Trek.
It is science
fantasy. And now look at Warhammer. Yeah. And now look at Warhammer, though. What is with all this Gothic architecture? There's a lot of skulls. Like there's something very different about it. And your audience changes and their taste changes, and we've seen, admittedly, with Cold Open Stories, there are conversations about what is Warhammer 40K, and we know that there is a large concern about, well, what how does gatekeeping exist? What is the story? We're able to get away with what we do because A, we try to be non-threatening, and B, the quality speaks for itself. But there are still stories that we try to push people's buttons and tell something a little bit different that, people may be like, oh, that's sacrosanct. You can't talk about that. We had Agtrol, the counterfeit blade that takes place during the War in Heaven, this sort of mythological time for the Eldar. And there are people who are like, this should not exist. This should only be a story because the minute you try to make some things real, it loses its value. But we still tried to play with this sort of magical realism of it, which a lot of people also appreciated. So it's interesting to say, you will have different tastes, different strokes for different folks. There will be different things that people enjoy, and that's okay. Just understanding that a good IP, a good franchise, is flexible enough to tell those different stories. And Warhammer and Games Workshop, what they've done is that. It is a diamond to be able to say we can tell different stories within this environment. Some stories, like, start to end, there's not a lot of room for deviation. But those ones that exist and permeate and create new fans and create new advocates are those that can actually kind of say, okay, well, let's do something a little adjacent. Let's try something a little bit different. And those can be exciting and bring in new people. And that's very exciting when we have conversations on Twitter or Instagram or in the Discord as well. And people are coming in with hot takes, let's say, on ways that can be done differently. And it's just fun. It's just very entertaining.
And about the one story you did about the Eldar and how it had bits of the War in Heaven, I was certainly interested when I saw bits of that. That's something Games Workshop never explored, and I was excited that someone else did for them.
Well, thanks. It's definitely something that had enticed me because there was an old reference to Lanthrelak and Jariella in a Games Workshop post on their website, which then found its way through into the wikis. It's kind of minimalized, let's say. But say, well, what would that war look like? And also, what would that war sound like? How do you design these magical blades? Are they actual magical blades, or is sword a metaphor for spaceship? I love when 40K goes for the literal interpretation of something as like, oh no, a sword is actually a sword, but then it's not really a simple blade. It's got these huge sci-fi magical psychic powers and things like that. And also the core of that story really is about someone finding out about their ancestors. Looking at where I live in my family and my life, the only reason that I'm here is because my ancient ancestors didn't get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, and somewhere through the line they didn't get popped off or killed in the Industrial Revolution, working in a factory. Like there's a solid reason, whether it's by fate or by strength of will, that I'm here, and I kind of have to appreciate those who came before me and actually are the reason for my existing. And that's a key component of the Counterfeit Blade and the story that happens with Ben Aruin, played by Elizabeth Plant, of just how do we appreciate what's come before? How do we feel closer to those that we will never know? We will never know our ancestors. And as far out, many of us can see our parents or grandparents, or if we're very fortunate, great-grandparents. But you cannot imagine how much you have in common with the people who share that legacy with you. And to say, if only we could open the door and have that conversation with them, we'd probably learn just as much about ourselves as about them.
Most definitely. And one time I was even having a conversation with a friend of mine once about how what would be interesting from Games Workshop is this sort of lore book about Eldar mythology, so that we can learn stuff like the Pantheon and the War in Heaven. I think something like that will make a great lore book for people to pick up and read.
There's a lot of that in the Codex, I know, that people latch onto, and they're hungry for more, and I'm certainly hungry for more. Mm-hmm. There's the way of writing it, though, I think, is, do you want that as world building, or do you want that as a character driven story? And for me, I would prefer the character. And I think it's much easier and more tempting to say, we'll give a little bit of world building and people can fill in, their ideas of the story themselves, because again, 40K is a setting. It's trying to create an environment where people can play in. And let's not mince words. This is a tabletop game based system. Like, that is the heartbeat. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about are the arteries. We're talking about some of the blood that's rushing out to the extremities of the audio or the books or the other licensed property. The heart really has been with the game, and the way that both Warhammer Storyforge as well as Games Workshop, the actual tabletop gaming and modeling team have worked. We can't mix it. That would we ever get that story from Games Workshop unless there was some sort of model release or some sort of tie-in being pushed? Unfortunately, I would say it would take a significant push from either a large author or some sort of external pressure. We're just, with Cold Open, saying, well, let's take that first step. Let's try that, because we think that we can entice people, and then they'll go, oh, that was interesting. And maybe they want to go back and mine the books. I've had people message me being like, did you see this from this really random, obscure book that was, only published in 1997? And they're sharing quotes with me. And I'm like, God, I wish I did. I wish I had that prescience to be like, well, yes, I was absolutely intending that when I wrote that in Ag Troll, but I didn't. It's really just the idea of we're singing from the same song book and trying to do credit to the setting.
Exactly. And going back on what you said, if it's a character or world building story, the idea would be that maybe it's an Inquisitor or Eldar. One of these characters are piecing together or uncovering old Eldar mythology, and it's essentially a collection of tales and all that. Because almost like with Liber Chaotica, I was going to say exactly like that. Yeah. It's a character-driven story. It's about a witch. It's about a witch hunter, if I recall correctly. He's interviewing people. He's uncovering secret cults and all that. He's piecing together what is chaos and what their cults are like, to explain to the people what is chaos and all that. So I think something like that, or maybe not as expensive, like with Liber Chaotica, but something like that with Eldar mythology,
See, the thing with Chaotica, and then we had with the the name always gets me, as Xenologist, perhaps, is that these people telling the stories 40K likes to have Inquisitors tell stories, or even the codexes are written from a future history point of view, is that they're fact finding and they're collecting data. For me, just as an audience and as a writer, that's actually not enough for me. I want to know, if we've got someone collecting this detail, who are they? What is their relationship to the environment? What is their immediate objective in trying to tell these stories? And what is the conflict in getting those stories out? What is their physical and psychological obstacle? What actions are they taking? So I have very high expectations when it comes to storytelling. And again, my taste to talent ratio, I still want to grow as an artist myself. But it's something that we really had to make clear when we launched Cold Open, is that this is not just creating a wiki article of like, look at these interesting facts and stories. Like, I'm so excited that there are characters that we're able to pull through in our pantheon of characters and say, we know that they have names. We have Irvi from Hunter's Watch, a Tau, commander. We have Rudolph and his brother, who are intrinsically tied throughout Hounds of Bedlam. I've got 3 of these characters tattooed on my arm already.
Awesome.
Just because of this love of the setting and the love of the characters. And they can also be reflections of, what I see of myself in them, or for other authors. We have some characters from some of our authors, and if they're, who you are, that they've got some characters that might pop up in another story, although not in a major way. I think this is also sort of the shared universe, the Marvel's, the MCU-ification of how we consume media, is we're always looking at Easter eggs of other stories. That's something that we're still saying, that we want to make sure that from start to finish, there's a contained element, that you've got 5 minutes or you've got 45 minutes. You're going to sit down, you're going to get into a story. It's going to make you think, it's going to make you feel, and then you get out and you go, wow, that was incredible. That's still our mandate, but it's also kind of tantalizing to have those little Easter eggs from time to time in moderation.
Yeah, of course. And I can certainly understand that. I do actually want to bring up one of your newer projects that you've actually been releasing right now, actually. 3 Chances. Part 2 has come out recently. And I gotta say, out of all the projects so far, what are your thoughts on this one?
What are my thoughts?
Yeah.
This one is a beast to get out, just because, again, we're producing this with like a million different conflicting things happening just in the real world. We've had cast members who've fallen ill, or we've had production delays, and it used to be that I'd be able to take the recording equipment and go to a firing range and collect audio that way. But even some businesses have been closed or opened, and in collecting the sound effects and the Foley, it's always weird when you show up with a full equipment kit, and you've got like a headset and you're like recording things as you walk around. This one has been a beast to actually to put into production. But I will say it is the one that has felt most like a novel, actually. Some of the other stories happen like right in the middle of action, because Cold Open, let's throw you right in. This one has kind of thrown into a internal conflict rather than external. And there's something very different compared to our other stories like that. It's actually, it's about Drukhari, entertaining. It's probably the most like our Craft World Ag Trail, in that it's dealing a lot more with a personal stake, an emotion of, there isn't a war going on, and these are the stories of the people on the side. This is all about someone's internal frustration and agitation and anger and just madness of being trapped in a position that they feel that they are bigger than, which, I mean, I think at everyone's point of life, you're like, I'm better than this, or I deserve more than this, or you're like, I feel conflicted because someone, I got passed over on a promotion and this other person got it. Like those very emotional, egoist feelings are perfect for telling a story about the Drukhari. And with Izenzen, played magnificently by Joseph Tweedale, who the minute we heard him, it was like, wow, this is our guy. This is our Kabbalite aspiring to dreams of being back to the head of his family. It's been a great production. Everyone involved has been amazing. We rolled with the punches and some delays, but I think the work really does speak for itself in the performances, that the core emotional truth of what we're hearing.
And Narina, he's certainly been enjoying the project too.
Oh yes, absolutely. Voicing Trezabale, and getting honestly the amount Narina's art output is always great to see, and she'd also done something for Three Chance. Great to see. So
Yeah, and here's a fun fact actually.
Mhm.
It's actually my very first Drukari like story that I'm listening to right now, or at least reading, quote unquote reading. Like I haven't really read or heard a Drukari like story. So this one is one great introduction and wanting me to gain to learn more about them. Or wanting to read more about them.
You know what, the tapestry of when you read Drukari stories, and we have a few on the site as well, and also spoiler, there are some coming with the fast fiction contest winners, so stay tuned for that.
Wink,
But,
wink.
yeah, wink, wink. The influence for the Drukari, obviously you pull from Games Workshop, but you also try to do something new. And three books that I was kind of simultaneously reading at the time were Michael Talbot's The Delicate Dependency, which is a novel about like vampire. Kristen White's young adult novel And I Darken, which is about Vlad the Impaler's children being sold off to kind of pay for his ongoing. And Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica, which has to do with a society that eats people as just a product. And I found that in Tender is the Flesh, there's a lot in there about how I think is analogous to how Drukari take slaves and treat them as property and as meat for their different components. And that's really where the idea of the brands came in. Ends in watching people shuffled through like cattle. When we talk about the idea of empires and the Cabalites and the families within Camorra, how they feud with each other and they fight these indirect wars. There's a lot of that from Kristen White's style of writing of nobles that are being married off to other houses or that have to just live with the people who've taken captive of their castle just because the virtue of, well, you don't want to get killed and it helps kind of placate other empires. And then Drukari themselves really are vampires, dark elves kind of mashed together in the setting. So there's a lot that you can, yeah.
Oh, sorry. And they certainly were, they certainly remind me of Cenobites from Hellraiser, certainly.
They really do. I mean, like let's be fair, the black leather and chains, like the sound design of having like chains. I was reading Clive Barker and trying to look for some sort of, if that had influenced 40K. I always believe that good writers will not just stick to the one genre. And I think that's important for writing to an IP is you have to have a good knowledge of the setting and the core emotional truths, but maybe not the encyclopedic knowledge. That's where editors can help you out going, oh, but actually, this date or this timeline or this character wouldn't say this, they would say that. And it's great to get that support that way. But
exactly.
look at the things that influenced what you enjoy. Look at the things that influence what you love. And you will start to kind of get yourself into the mind of the original authors of that thing you love by going, oh, if they like this, then maybe there's some of the additional truths or things that you enjoyed yourself that you're like, oh, I see they were playing and rehashing these. And Clive Barker with the Drukari really was, one of those influential pieces. I mean, it's been documented. We're certain of it. They're there. And so going back and let's be fair, he's enjoyable read. It's an easy read at times, but it's not a fun read at others. You're reading some of the stuff and you kind of forget like, oh, this is, you read through, which was the book? He actually did a children's novel, I remember, and the name has escaped me right now, but like reading everything an author can do. It's not just about like their horror stuff, but he did Candyman, right?
Wow.
And you kind of forget that but then you go watch Hellraiser and you can find the connective tissue of this idea of myths that exist in urban fantasy or the modern day dark fantasy. And then you realize that Dark Eldar kind of really are living in that same realm. Now, with 40K, we might think of it more of the action component, the raids or the decadent violence, and you might have flashbacks of, Blade and Blade 2, Guillermo del Toro, like this idea of vampire, see the underground and everything is a nightclub. But looking at some of these influences, I just really enjoyed how Herman Melville or Edgar Allan Poe or Ray Bradbury were kind of plucked by Clive Barker into his own writing, and then 40K plucked from that, and you can kind of work yourself back to these great literary traditions, which hopefully we're trying to exude and call back to, both with saying, well, this is definitively 40K, but let's try to reinvigorate and give it some new life and some new energy with these other influences, other ways of telling 40K that aren't just, I read a codex and now I'm telling a spinoff. It's, with Aizenzen and the way that he looks down at the people, or how he meets the homunculus in the story is very fey, like fey, like very fantasy of the idea of fairy godmother, except it's this horrible dark Eldar scientist that is coming to help you out. And always be wary of people who come bearing gifts, or
like a traveling wizard, you could say.
Very much, and let's be fair, it's elves in space. There's a lot of fantasy connections, but so why not indulge that? Tell it in that 40K trappings, but let's make no mistakes of where those original root influences came from. Now let's just push them one step further. I think that people are going to be a little bit more surprised of what we do with Orovor, the homunculus. But we've had a great cast. I mean, Shaviste, played by Sarah McManus, she had some great stuff in episode 2 that just came out about her sort of motivations and why she wanted to become a leader of a cabal, and the sort of imposter syndrome that she had, and putting on a new mask, becoming a new person, and then thinking of how
a literal mask, someone else's face.
Yeah, the whole wall of people's faces. But Eldar love their myths and their stories. They love, and the Harlequins are a great example of a tabletop game version of that. They just love to tell stories and live them and relive them and fall into them and play with archetypes. And so they're, on the wall you've got the faces of different trophies, and that's very much about Shavista saying, I have imposter syndrome. I am going to take trophies and try to fulfill this idea of what I think, someone of my station should be, versus you've got Aizenzen and Trezabale who lived it. They lived that nobility, and they didn't feel they need to put on airs. They just were strong and respected, and they've lost that. So how do you take it back? Well, we choose violence. That's how it usually goes.
Yeah, certainly. And I think with the Drukhari story with 3 chances, it really does show how really grim the dark Eldar see, the rest of the galaxy. Because when they were, especially in the first story, I keep forgetting the main character's name. I apologize. I'm not so great with names, but
that's okay. Yeah, Aizenzen is our
Aizenzen. Yeah. Thank you. On his remarks towards humans, they say, "Well, humans aren't people." This goes to show you how, factions like Drukhari and the Imperial Man see each other, where it's like, no, these people aren't our species, therefore they're not actual people. They're something else. Where it's like, oh, this Tau isn't an actual thing. It's not a person. It's an alien. Whereas with Drukhari, they'll see humans as, well, it's not a person. It's a monkey, or play on words of monkey.
Yeah. The dichotomy that you can play with between what humans in 40K see of the alien races and how those aliens see themselves, I think that we actually did very, very, pointedly with On the Hunter's Watch, which was our Tau story that came right before 3 Chances.
Of course, definitely.
Part 1 is all about the Tau and how they feel threatened by humanity, and they go into this sort of diplomatic meeting a little bit nervous, and then, stuff hits the fan. And actually, a lot of what we did with the I was really excited to hear similar notes played on in the Exodite that just came out. Like, there are some specific cues and stuff there that I'm like, we're singing from the same songbook, right? But when you get to part 2, it was entirely a human point of view.
Exactly.
And it's this idea of, if you're taught to hate someone, what happens when in that story we have Marlene, played by the amazing Melissa Medina, with this character who's like, I hate aliens, xenophobia, they're terrible. And then uncontrollably to herself, she actually meets her very first aliens who have been hung up and strangulated and hung out on a tree in the courtyard of her city. And she cannot control this part of herself that had been killed of, why do I feel guilt? This doesn't compute. And what happens when someone's worldview, when they are living in a cult, because that's what the Imperium's faith-based system is how do I react to this idea that I don't feel like I belong? And she goes through the ringer of this self-doubt and guilt, and I'm making mistakes, and there's a lot of self-hatred involved in that, which by the time the story ends, she's actively just hating on herself. Why did I do this? I need to go back. And whether it's, some psychic magic, boogaloo of did the stars conspire to make her stop, or is it just her natural environment and she's gleaning symbols? She does not return home again and ends up inadvertently finding her way into the Tau. I know that we never that the story has kind of paused here, but we have something exciting that will actually be continuing the environment, continuing the story in the future. We hear about Gevesa, the human helpers of the Tau. Well, what happens when you get a double agent of that? We haven't seen that in 40K. We say people leave the Imperium, they join the Tau, life is better with the Tau, and that's it. Or so we're taught to believe with the Codex. But what happens if someone's just really deep undercover and is actively undermining this? And that's something that a bit of a teaser that we'll be dealing with coming up in the future of our productions.
That's certainly exciting. And actually, I do want to give a quick comment about the whole Gruvessa thing. There is something actually like that in the Farsight books. I'm not sure if you read them.
Mm-hmm. I have a great community of Tau readers in my corner. I have not had the chance to read.
Yeah, I'm a huge Tau fan myself, and we actually have a character within the Farsight books who's actually a undercover inquisitor, where she does plays along the idea of the Gruvessa, the human helper. But by the end of the second book, she actually starts to change her mind, where she's like, she sends one last letter to her and to her superiors, where she goes, I'm no longer coming back to the Imperium. I'm going to be staying here with the Tau. And she knows this is almost like a death sentence for her. Yet at the same time, she can't convince herself otherwise, where it's like, well, what if I'm starting to agree with these people, even though they might have a very childish understanding of what is chaos? For spoilers for people who haven't read the books yet.
Was that Vicola? I can't remember the name, but
I don't remember her name as well. Okay. So you're good.
That's right. Yeah, two guys were chatting. We're like, remember the thing? I don't, but yeah, yes, but no. The idea of the indoctrination, because we do usually see people. It's like, oh, you move from the Imperium to the Tau, and life is better, and you become part of the Tau. But we've seen someone who was in the Imperium with Hunter's Watch change and be, regrettably against their own taught nature, fall into instinct and join the Tau, and eventually, becoming a part of the greater good. Mm-hmm. What do you do when someone is so converted, so hardline? And I think that's terrifying. That is scary, because we know there are people in this world that the dogmatic vision that they have of their worldview will keep them locked in. And in the case of a Guevesa, if you get high enough up the ranks, the damage that you could do to their system and opening the door for the Imperium to do something tragic and dramatic is there. And so this is not the last that we've seen of the Tau with Cold Open Stories.
Oh, of course not. And I've certainly been a huge fan of the Tau over the years, and I've been enjoying their new codex as well. And I do actually have my own bit of interpretation on how the Tau function with their interaction with the Imperium. Of course, with something like 40K, there's always different perspectives on things. Of course, something like that's going to happen. And if you give me like a moment to, if you're interested in hearing my idea,
indulge me, man.
Yeah. So my interpretation with the Tau Empire is that they do have the idea of the greater good, but the question is, well, is this really for the great good of everyone, or for the select few, or in this case, a select few of the top of the caste system? Because understand that for something like the Tau Empire, when an alien species join the Empire, they're not automatically part of the caste system. There's Tau, there's Ethereals, Tau, and everyone else. There's water, earth, air, fire, those castes, but above them is the ethereal caste. This is not like, oh, we're equal amongst the castes. This is, we are the top leaders of the caste. We are the sort of pontiffs of the Empire. Whereas with everyone else, we have the crude recruit mercenaries. We have the Vespids, and for humans, they make it clear there's two different kinds of humans. There's the Grula, the humans of the Imperium, and the Gruevessa, the humans who are helpers of our empire. And the question comes to, I actually made a whole video about this too, about giving my whole idea about, do Tau fit into 40K? And I was like, well, they do fit in 40K. Because even though they're not like in your face, grim, dark, we're an evil regime, they have this sort of subtlety to them. They have this sort of, come join us. We can make your life better. We can give you rights that the Imperium doesn't provide. And in a sense, they sort of do. We see this with Damocles. Yet the question comes down to, well, we're going to convert you into the humans that we want, to be humans, to not be Grula, but to be Gruevessa, the helpers of us, servants of us, you could say. And
it definitely plays into the perspective, though, of these stories. If they're written from the codexes, they always take that bit of like, oh, this is a bit of an imperial point of view, right? Can they?
Well, previously.
Previously. And so I think what's exciting about the new brand of codexes, because I also, being close enough to the community, there was a lot of people freaking out about the lore in the Tau Codex, and there were lies thrown around that they were going to be like undoing some stuff, and the Tau were going to be super grim dark. And for me, I personally enjoy the Tau the most. Other alien races are involved, and it's kind of this, whatever the amalgamation is of different races working together, it's there and it's intact. But in difference invites struggle, to the point that you're making of, you're going to have a bunch of people working to a single goal. But we have this belief that not all people are created equal. And specifically when we talk about the way societies in the West operate, we are trying to color the Tau with a Western perspective on an alien race that, has taken influences from other societies within human history. Like, this is all based on fiction. We're creating an alien race based on something made up, the Tau. So I really enjoy that line of thinking of, yes, we'll invite you in, but is that tension of, do you work with us or do you work for us? I think is something that depends on when you started becoming a fan of the Tau. Some people like that tension. Some people don't like that tension.
I certainly do.
Yeah. And tension also just makes for better storytelling. It allows you to even if they're not going to all out fight, my idea is, you put two people in a room and you wait for how long it's going to take for them to disagree about something. That's where the interesting storytelling is what are they disagreeing about? Okay, now who's going to get over it first and who's going to hold on to that? And that usually is a involved way of just trying to find characterization.
And we see this sort of tension, especially with Farsight and his enclaves, where they flat out became an independent colony. And this is a sort of embarrassment for the Empire, because they keep telling their people it's the Ethereals who help run the Empire. It's they that save the Tau Empire from killing each other. But with something like the Farsight enclaves, it shows that no, we don't need ethereal rule. And to them, that's kind of it's an embarrassment. So they try to undermine Farsight from his history and tell people this is a forbidden zone. These are not Tau people anymore. These are something almost sacrilegious to us. And it's so weird to say that, because the Tau are a godless people, but going against the Ethereals is a sort of act of sacrilege for them. That's how it is, sort of. Even though the Tau aren't religious, they don't believe in gods. They do see the Ethereals as godly beings. They do see them as like popes and all that, or at least how we might interpret them.
Yeah, in our interpretation, again, like we see it as a sacrilege or desecration or blasphemy, because again, 40K has a lot of rich faith-based and religious vibes for it. I think honestly what it reminds me of a lot is just disrespect. If we were just to take the religious component out, secularize the hell out of it, it is contemptuous. It is derision. It is ridicule. This idea that you don't need a religion attached to it, but it is incredibly disrespectful. And there can be a deep spiritual disrespect that is not religious. And it's hard to communicate, depending on your background or your history or your upbringing, to kind of separate the two. But that idea of irreverence of like, how dare you, be so flippant? A very basic example is maybe like, grow up and you go to school. Would you as a child ever walk up to your teacher in like elementary and call them by their first name.
No,
It'd be like,
no.
Mr. Robert. Like you don't do that. So that is a cultural component of how we, appropriate respect and civility. And if you were going to say this cast saved our butts from fighting each other, and you want to go against that, that is discourteous. It is not civil, and it is rude. And it is rude to a degree of like, I would rake myself over coals rather than be that rude. Well, that's not religious, but that is a heightened emotional state of, of insolence, of irreverence that you have to say, okay, I would never do that because that's breaking a societal law. It's not a godly law, it's a societal one, but holy moly, you just do not do that.
Oh, of course, and of course they don't see themselves as, oh, this is an act of sacrilege. Of course not. But it's more of, this is something that we find very sacred, even not in this way of sacred of, oh, we're religiously sacred, but more of, to our culture and to our people, this is sacred to us. That's something you just do not do. Like, to many people, it would be very disrespectful to, like, say, burn their country's flag. That's something that would certainly wild people up. Depends on who you ask, of course, but that's something people can say with something like the Tau, of how they see of their ethereals, because of how huge the ethereals play themselves in their society.
Yeah. And so the next point of that would be what's the character? Who is again, this is the world. Who is the person that's going to do that? Who is the person that's going to fight against that? What is their own guilt? In this case, it's Farsight. This is the character that we remember. This is the person we're like, this is exciting because there's an actual name behind it. Treat the same way for anything that we do with cold open stories. Just, play that roulette. Okay, spin the dial. Today it's going to be Sisters of Battle. What is that internal and external conflict that they would have to deal with?
Of course. And one last thing I do want to say about the Tau Empire with my interpretation. Me and Fred were actually having a conversation about this once, where every time a faction tried making a galactic empire, something messed up happens, or something happens so badly that it almost kills off the people. For instance, we see the Necrontyr when they tried making their own empire. We see this with the Eldari when they tried making their own empire. And we definitely see this with the Emperor when he tried making his own empire. Every time these factions try doing a huge, mission like this, something really messed up happens that ends up ruining the people. And it comes to the question of, when will something like this happen with the Tau, a society that's so young but advancing so quickly? And
that's the horror story, right? Like,
exactly.
We've seen all these other races fall down.
The Greek tragedy.
We know it's like, we are conditioned to believe that is going to be coming for the Tau, and that's kind of their tragedy. It's the idea that they don't know the sacrifices that they're going to have to go through. And we start to see this with the recent sphere of expansion.
Exactly.
In new fiction of you start to compromise, and that's where real danger comes from.
Exactly.
For the Tau.
Exactly with these spirit expansion, they literally enter hell and they see demons on full display. And I'm not sure if you read the book yet, but they see the creation of a Tau god, not from them, but from the humans, a sort of caricature on what is the greater good. And this wilds up the commander of this exhibition.
Yeah.
And again, with something like Farsight, again, he saw the full display on what is chaos, and he starts to question, are the ethereals really trying to are the ethereals keeping secrets from us, especially from his master, Puretide, when he tells him, do not trust all of them. And this plays on to the title of his second book, Empire of Lies. Is this really an empire of wanting to spread truth and unity, or is this an empire run by puppeteers telling lies to the people? And it comes to the question of, what will be the cost of lies?
Mm-hmm. And those people struggling against that, like, what lies will you have to keep, and what is the cost of lies? I think we will all agree that
Chernobyl was great with that quote.
That's actually, I didn't even think of that, but that is a wonderful example of all right, let's do it. Let's get the next Tau Chernobyl crossover, right? Like, let's mine that for some info. But there's a lot that we can see in there that would apply for trying to tell a Tau story. Absolutely. And
one last thing, when comparing the Empire to Imperium, whilst the Emperor was doing his Great Crusade, I think he, in my interpretation, he was walking across the tightrope, and he held everyone as he was walking across his tightrope. And it was not the question of if, but when he's going to trip over, and everyone trips over with him. Because as soon as people started discovering chaos, as soon as people started picking sides, that's when the dream of the Imperium crashed down and became what it is now. And that was the Emperor. He crossed the tightrope. But with the Ethereals, no matter how much they try to organize the puppets or how they try to keep their strings nice and straight, eventually strings are going to get caught up, or they're going to get knotted together. And we see this twice so far with Farsight and the Sphere expansion, the Force Spear expansion. It comes to the question of how soon will all these strings get, knotted together. Eventually, that's going to happen.
It is the great tragedy of the setting that empires end in ruin, unless you're the orcs, at which point is just you're having a great time no matter what. Like we should not leave out the fact that we're talking about all these destroyed empires. The orcs came to a great big high, but they're even their ideas of the prime orcs and maybe their empire has fallen apart. But they're still like the probably the ones that could bounce back the easiest and still have a great time, even if they're not. So a round of applause for them to still be the happiest faction in all of 40K. Exactly. So,
and from the Eldar, from that one quote, how he states that out of everyone within the galaxy, it is the orcs who, even though this might be a very taboo thing to say, are the most successful species in the galaxy because they're practicing what they want. They want war, and they're having it.
And having a great time doing it. I think what's really entertaining is to actually go back to Warhammer40,000.com, like their main intro orientation page that they have, and just go through those pages that they have for each of the races, and just see what what those core pieces are, and then ask people, why did you pick this faction? What was the interesting thing about it? And it's usually what is their internal content. For orcs, it's might makes right. And they are driven to be punchy and bonkers, but there's a sense of satisfaction and joy. And their conflict is war. Are they not enjoying enough of it? The Tau, what is their core conflict to overcome? Is it the idea that they have all the best battle suits and they're super advanced? Well, there's enough in there about alien auxiliaries and caste and working together. Well, you can understand the conflict of that is. Will they, how do they manage working together? If you want to do one that's a little bit more difficult, it's Necron, it's this, can you return to an empire? Can you bring back what has been lost? For them, it's, they're waking up and the galaxy was not theirs. And are they irrelevant now? Or are they going to be able to really sweep the galaxy? Unfortunately, with their re-release, we can say that they're still they're waking up, but they're just a little bit sleepy still. They're going to get there. Exonerable in their advance to restore their empire, but there's still not enough of them woken up yet. They'll get there. We're looking forward to touching on Necron in the future with Cold Open.
Awesome. That's very exciting to hear. And I do want to ask you this question out of curiosity. For something like Cold Open Stories, of course, your main introduction is 40K. That's the meat and potatoes of the radio show, of the stories you guys, people submit their stories to. Do you think Cold Open Stories might be interested sometime down the road in exploring Warhammer sayings like Fantasy or AOS?
So it's something that's been commonly requested enough that we had to open another separate Discord sub-channel for people to talk all about it. We actually have a lot of our attention right now on Stories Originals, which is something that we'll be starting within the this first half of the year. There's an announcement that we'll be putting out shortly, but we are looking to diversify our portfolio of options with something that isn't strictly tied to a Games Workshop IP, while still continuing to provide all the great Warhammer content that people enjoy.
Oh, that's very exciting to hear.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta, just give people the opportunity to tell some of their own stories. And again, it's going to be a trip. There's going to be some news on that shortly. We've just admittedly had our hands full with the fast fiction contest, and the results for that will be out this weekend, as well as the ongoing production of 3 Chance.
And I think this is a most appropriate time to actually ask you some questions that people have asked of us, if you're interested.
Oh no! Yeah, let's do it.
Sure thing. So pulling up the first one, probably the most famous question that people will ask is, what are your favorite factions?
So I started 40K by originally I had grabbed some Eldar and I thought they looked really cool, but I just couldn't get the painting scheme and I didn't like the models that much and just sat on that for a while. And when I really came into Warhammer proper was with the release of the Gathering Storm. So there was a large gap between there. With the Gathering Storm, I saw Belisarius Call. And I'm like, this is incredible. That was my very first model I picked up. I did have enough presence to learn to do that in sub-assemblies for painting, but no one told me about like rattle can primer. So I remember priming that whole sucker by hand black and painting them up to a white with red accent robes. I was clearly not the smartest person for painting my models, but
we all start somewhere.
They are my bread and butter faction, although in hindsight I could have done that a lot quicker, but I would really say that it would be Mechanicus, followed therein by probably Eldar, and then the third would always be whatever production we're working on. I mean, that rotates pretty hard. You know, doing Tau, they're the favorite for the moment. Doing Drukhari, they're the favorite for the moment. You know, I really do throw myself behind whatever we're working on and trying to treat the same love of someone who's maybe been a fan of them for 30 years or they just found them recently and like, well, what's cool about the faction? That said, Games Workshop, you got my number. We're really working on trying to make sure that Trader Guardsmen get their due soon. They're pretty high up there for me.
Yeah, and for me, it depends on when you ask me what are my favorite factions and all that for both 40K, AOS, and Fantasy and all that. It does change because, you know, I would read a book, I'm really interested in this, or I'm rereading this part in the Codex. Yeah, this reminds me of why I like these factions and all that. But I will say that I'll pick 2 factions are my absolute favorite. That these are the coffee factions for me. Something I can have every day and not think anything of it because I like them so much. That being Space Marines and Tau. Not the most original, I know, but I did get into 40K because of Space Marine, right? Probably by many people, or what their very, very first exposure to 40K was, a Space Marine. And I really do like Space Marines, and eventually I started learning about Tau, and it's like, Tau are very cool. They're an alien empire. They have other alien species that work for them. That's very cool. Then I pick up their most recent codex. Vespits mean that low to the empire because they don't even have their own page of lore about them.
Yep.
That's the thing. There's a lore page about the crew, but not the Vespits, and it kind of shows why I don't really like the 9th edition codices that much, because it doesn't give you enough feeling in terms of lore when compared to, like, say, 8th edition codices.
Yeah. We roll the punches of ups and downs of when we get that content. Here's this hope, and you know, you don't have to wait for a whole nother codex. That maybe we'll start to see some chances taken on more novels or other fiction. I mean, if you're a fan of the Tau, the Exodite just came out, and Warhammer Plus, and you know, we were actually really excited to have had the animation team behind the Exodite, Lost Legion Studios. They judged the Exodite fast fiction contest for us last year.
Awesome.
For contest 4. So Maiden Worlds and Exodites. There's some stories on there. You could go get some Exodite love. Otherwise, you know, there's more than enough Tau content on the site. If you're hungering and you're like, I need more GW, where can I find some? Well, we've also got some, and it's available now.
Link in the description.
Yeah, pointing downwards at the arrows and stuff like that. So it's all there.
Maybe I'll have it down there or something like that, or maybe I won't and troll the person.
Yep. What were some of the other questions that you got there today?
Sure thing. And 3 questions actually from the same person. Well, another person, but he asked 3 questions. How do you manage to create a fan fiction site of such high quality dedicated only to 40K?
Short answer, you find people with like-minded ideas. We have the editorial team who support the short fiction pieces. I've had the benefit of working with some incredible editors, and then some of it is also just people taking the chance. I mean, we've been featured on a bunch of different podcasts within the 40K community who've helped drive traffic to us. But like I was saying, we've worked with people who maybe they don't know Warhammer. There was one performer, incredibly talented, industry known, and they were like, I just want to do this because my son likes Warhammer, and I thought it would make me a cool mom. And I'm like, there's something really nice about that and very pure.
Oh, definitely.
Just focus on the content. And I think that also has to go with timing. We don't play in the same algorithmic role of YouTube, for example. Like, what's the frequency? How soon are you getting videos out? Like,
oh yeah.
We really focus on, we'll release it when it's ready. And the world just doesn't have that same ticking clock as, maybe 20 years ago, where a video game company wouldn't release a game until it was ready. We kind of treat the same thing. Is like, there's so much noise out there. We can just take the time, and if people really enjoy what we do, they will come back because the quality will speak for itself. And that has actually proven to be the way that we've been able to create the site with such high quality. Is you'll get it when it's ready, when we feel that we actually have great art involved, and treating it as fan fiction, as artistic content, and just taking the time to make sure it's done right.
Exactly. And with something like Cyberpunk 2077, it's it's been in production for years, guys. It's going to be great when it comes out. There's not going to be any glitches. Oh, and there's going to be more delays after.
And that's also about like promising with what is within your means. I mean, we've never made any indication of like how soon stuff will come out. We just say it'll be worth the wait. And when it comes to the talent involved, like, we've just been blessed by people who've been auditioning, and many of the audio dramas now, well over 700 auditions for these roles in each production, and it's like some really big people that were like, we feel we may have tricked you. You do realize this is like volunteering and fun, and like, yeah, no, I'm down. It just the quality is there, and we just tears roll down my face that people feel the same way of wanting to tell good. So it's just surround yourself with like-minded people who just want to put the art first, as doing good quality content. So yeah,
of course. And another question is, what is your pitch for a Black Library novel you'd want to read?
I feel like I'm kind of already doing it, to be perfectly honest, with every audio drama.
That's right.
I'm like, all right, here's my pitch. I honestly, I feel the one that would have been the most Black Library-ish that they would have been Hounds of Bedlam. I feel like doing Hounds of Bedlam as something within GW is just, there's not enough Traitor Guardsman stuff out there, and they're always treated as kind of
cartoon villain.
Yeah, they're cartoon villains. It's not like Wile E. Coyote, but they're inept. Or you don't get that. You get like cults who are just like blind zealots. It's like, give me some people who are actually capable. Exactly. Blood for the blood god. It's like, well, how about you give me some people who are just like, calculating military minds. Like, I'm not saying, like, to pull a Star Wars reference, like, I'm not saying like give me Grand Admiral Thrawn, that level of like, you must know your enemy to defeat them, and this sort of brilliant tactician of that. You can be a little bit more salacious and violent, but give me something really like calculating. And yeah, they can be as a part of cults. And the problem with chaos is it is chaotic. Let's make no mistake. Chaos is chaotic, which means that you don't usually do a lot of deeper thought. You're kind of pulled by impulse of the immaterium. But that's why you got Tzeentch and Slaanesh and these passions and wants.
Or
I
perhaps
think would have been up there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Or perhaps it's chaos warping the followers into something that they want. Yes, chaos is chaos because it's the name, but by their realm of their origin, the warp, to warp humanity in a sense,
Yeah, exactly. And I think as my fallback though, Egg Twirl the Counterfeit Blade is something that is not going to get explored by GW. Like they are not going to the War in Heaven. That will not happen. It's part of the Eldar mythology. But I do like the idea of some characters. And again, we play with magical realism. But like we talk about like how Kane is actually on a battle. We don't explicitly say what that looks like. It's good to leave that in imagination. I think that's why perfect for 40K rather than, would you do that in animation? Well, people will pour over that and just nitpick the absolute shit out of it. To be like, whoa, what? Why is he physically there? Should he be an ethereal? Why is that not an avatar of? It's like, no, just leave some stuff to people's imagination and focus on the character. That would probably be my other pitch. Somewhere, somehow. I don't know. Maybe I'll change my idea in a week, but just really trying to turn those pitch ideas into actual content right now, and just coming up on 3 years of that. So not really working on.
Oh, sorry, you got cut off there.
Oh, I was just saying, not really working on a Black Library pitch. Just trying to put out, turn those pitches into actual content right.
Oh, and that's right. And we see this with your work, and from your pitches, you've created such excellent content. I just want to say. But as for myself, for what pitch I would do for a Black Library novel, I did kind of share this idea with another guest about a potential Lilith book. That's something I would be most interested in seeing, where maybe we can see, how she is in the current era and how she might have been in her early years as a succubi or as a witch and all that, where we can see how she was in the very beginning and where she became now. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. No, that'd be fun. That'd definitely be fun.
And this is actually sort of a pitch for a third book that I hope to see get written down online, and that is the third Farsight book. What I'm interested in seeing is that in the previous books, Commander Farsight has been exposed to the warp, and it seems that he's trying to become corrupted in the same way Horus was in the Horus Heresy. But what I would like to see is that, in my interpretation at least, both Horus and Farsight looked into the abyss that is chaos, but when chaos stared back, it was Horus who blinked. So mean that it was Horus who became the war master of chaos. Oh, I am the destroyer of worlds. I'm going to wage war on my father. Instead, with Farsight, I want to see him having that internal conflict, saying, no, I will not be corrupted by something so foreign and alien to me. Something where I'm not going to become your canary. I'm going to become my own person and become my own individual. And as we see this conflict, High Fleet Kraken is invading the Farsight enclaves. And we can see here the enclaves trying to, fight off this huge swarm without the help of the Empire. And maybe the Empire in the shadows is sending probes to watch them to see how they do. And when they realize, should we intervene or should we wait until these traitors are gone and then help out and try and make up some story later? But when they see Farsight and his cast, fight off the High Fleet, they're able to save the enclaves without the help of ethereals. They go, oh, this is beyond us now. If we do something now, it's only going to get worse. That's one pitch I want to see for the third Farsight book.
It would be interesting to see if, in with that pitch idea, whether we will be getting more Farsight from Phil Kelly, or if we're going to see that
Phil Kelly
open up from other writers. Though, I mean, like I'm always very interested in seeing who the new names are coming out of Black Library. Like that's kind of a big sort of like hobby for me, is just being like, all right, new and exclusive. Who are the new names? Who's coming out here, right? Like, it's not. I don't believe it's going to be 40K. I believe it's going to be fantasy. I'll have to double check, but the Goth Goal Hollow. I have not had the opportunity to read any Anna Stevens. I know that Anna's, I believe, in Invocations and Anathemas as well. But like, I'm always kind of peeking out to see who are these new names that are coming out, and also some of these premier novels that have come out of stuff that I've enjoyed. Yeah, will we see it from Phil Kelly? Will we see it soon? It seems like Phil's been kind of chained to a desk and is trying to pump out like a now, but maybe we'll see something sooner than later.
And
cool.
And last question is actually, what are your favorite type of stories that make their way into Cold Open?
Character first. I mean, one of the obstacles that we see is a lot of actually, let me rephrase my answer. I like the ones that have both a physical and an internal conflict that are occurring, but the internal conflict is some sort of contradiction of what's happening on the outside. I really do enjoy stories where there's two people and they have to be in a room together and they know they hate each other, but they have to deal with it. There's something about that tension that is always entertaining to read. But I also like when characters are just not giving the whole truth to the world around, to others around them. We see that with many of the submissions on the site. I'm not going to keep talking about the audio dramas. We see within the short fiction anthology or the fast fiction contest. Fast fiction, it's hard to do because you got to tell a story within 1,000 words. Within short fiction, I mean, some of the stories that I've enjoyed the most. I mean, you're not supposed to pick your favorites, but I like seeing when people are trying to do new things with Minos. I think that's been very exciting. I think that some of the stories that we've had, like Joyce Cheng working with the Titans, was just such a great and refreshing book with DU. That submission of having this great difference between internal voice and external voice, that you're doing both. Those stories are always very to read.
Oh, I'm sorry, you got cut off again.
So the stories that have a great internal and external voice for your protagonist, those are just very exciting stories for me to read. I really enjoy them.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I do find the whole idea is that yes, your actions are speaking louder than words, but maybe the words in your head maybe speaks louder about yourself. Say
exactly.
Yeah, you're in the same room. It looks like you're tolerating the person. You're seeing on opposite sides, or you're sitting near each other, and you're not, physically attacking the person because you dislike them that much. But inside, you're thinking, I absolutely hate this person, and I want to slam him against a wall. That's the kind of dialogue I like to read in like stories and all that, where we see the inside thoughts of the person.
Exactly. Yeah. Get to that inner life. Get to what is their emotional stake and everything.
Exactly. And
Very cool. Well, thank you for those questions. That was great.
Oh, sorry, you got cut off again. Can you repeat that?
I was just saying, thank you for those questions. That was great.
No problem. And with all said and done, I think we've reached the end of the show. Is there something you'd like to say before we call it in?
Oh, well, depending when people are listening to this, just want to encourage them to check out coldopenstories.com. We've got the recent part 2 release of 3 Chances, our Drukhari audio drama. You can check that out. But if you're a fan of the Exodite, you just watch that. Know that we've got some great Tau and Exodite stories within the short fiction anthology and the fast fiction contest. And please consider submitting to either participate in voice acting, submitting your own story, or entering the writing contest and joining other like-minded authors. So just tell people to check out coldopenstories.com.
And I'll definitely have those links in the description down below.
Perfect.
And with all said and done, thank you everyone for watching the new installment of On Air with Jarvis. If you would like to see more, consider subscribing, activate the bell notification button, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one, guys.